Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Story Time. Today we are going to read Chapter 3, Waiting, of The Apple and the Arrow. Now, if you remember last week when we read the story, this young little man, he stood still as he trusted his dad would get that arrow right through the apple that was on his head. He did not tremble, he was not afraid, but he knew his dad would split that arrow or apple right in two with the arrow. But after that all happened, William Tell was taken into custody by Gessler, and now the family is waiting to hear about William Tell. And that is Chapter 3, Waiting. Here we go. Rain poured down upon the land of Uri all that night. The angry winds knocked down a tall pine tree near the hut, just missing it. Boulders slid down the mountainside as smaller rocks rolled about on the roof of the hut. A mountain stream just beyond the goat pen overflowed its banks. When dawn came, the Tell home was damp and cold as rain had leaked through the holes in the roof and had dripped down the chimney. The wood in the fireplace was wet, and it would not burn. It was almost as cold within the house as without. Nevertheless, Grandfather First, who had stayed all night, was up early to milk the goats, so that Walter and Rudy could stay in bed where it was warm. Soon after breakfast, a few neighbors began to come. Others followed, and long before, Walter and Rudy wondered if all the people of Burr Glen were trying to crowd into their single, smoky little room. More came constantly. They had heard rumors of the shooting at Altdorf, and like all country people, were curious. They wanted to know more. They especially wanted to know what happened to William Tell, their new hero. A neighbor brought Hedwig a hindquarter of venison, another a flagon of sweet cider. Then little Mary, a playmate of the Tell boys, who also herded goats on the mountainside, handed Walter a pair of woolen socks. She had knit them herself during the long hours of herding. "They'll keep you warm, Walter," she said, "now that it is winter time. My, you must have been scared yesterday when the soldiers bound you and you had to stand and be shot at," she whispered to him. "No, I wasn't scared a bit," replied Walter. "I knew all the time that Father couldn't miss." Rudy only peered at the crowd of people from behind the bed curtain. He was still a little boy and shy of strangers. As each neighbor entered the hut, Grandfather began again the story of the exciting morning in Altdorf. Walter noticed how red in the face his grandfather got during each account, and how excited he grew as the day went on. There never seemed an end of the people coming and going. It was like a great church festival or a wedding. But the hours passed and the rain finally stopped. The boys ran to look after the goats, glad to be out of doors and away from the hut, so full of smoke and neighbors. Just then Walter noticed Ulrich, the baker's son, puffing up the hill. When he reached the door, Walter asked him, "Have you learned anything about my father?" But the boy did not answer and rushed into the cabin full of importance. Walter and Rudy followed at his heels. "You must have more news," Walter heard his grandfather explain to Ulrich. "I have," gasped the boy breathlessly, for he was tired from running. "Out with it, lad, out with it. Don't stand there like a dumb ox." Grandfather was irritated in the boy's slowness. Ulrich only walked over to the smoking fireplace and warmed his hands as if he had no news at all. Then he said, "Wolfgang, the fisherman on the lake of the Forest Canton, saw it himself." "Saw what?" Ulrich questioned Hedwig eagerly, taking the boy by the shoulders. "He told Rudens, the herdsman, and Rudens ran all the way up to Burr Glen to bring my father the news," replied Ulrich. "What news, silly?" asked an old crone peevishly. The people all waited breathlessly while the baker's son enjoyed keeping them waiting. "Well," drawled Ulrich at last, "Wolfgang was pulling in his nets yesterday when the storm broke. He saw a large boat tossing about on the lake. The waves were high. At first Wolfgang could not see who was in the boat because it was pitching very much. But as it whirled nearer, he saw there were soldiers in the boat. And then Ulrich hesitated and waited for all eyes to be centered on him. And then he saw William Tell steering the boat. William Tell steering the governor's boat? Impossible! Exclaimed the people as in one voice. Walter shoved his way through the packed crowd until he stood just beside the baker's son. No, he was not mistaken, Ulrich continued. He knows Tell. Tell was at the tiller. Gessler was there too, and he was holding his belly. He was seasick. Rudens could make nothing of this strange sight. He did not know what happened in Altdorf at all. And as he watched, here Ulrich lowered his voice, and all the people crowded closer to him. As he watched, he repeated, Tell steered the boat toward a rocky ledge below Axenstein. Just as the prow touched the rock, Tell jumped. And then, quick as a flash of lightning, he kicked the boat back into the water and ran into the shelter of the forest like a doe. A great shout filled the cabin. That Tell! Oh, that Tell! Praise be to the Lord! Women wept, and Hedwig fell to her knees and bowed her head. Did the soldiers shoot at him? Asked Grandfather. No. Wolfgang says no, replied the boy, delighted at the excitement he had caused. They were too surprised and too seasick. The soldiers were pea-green with sickness. The boat tossed up like a mad thing. Wolfgang could not see much of them for the rain, but he thinks. And here the boy waited for the audience to look at him. He thinks the boat sank, and all in it were drowned. Drowned? The governor drowned? May Gessler and his knaves lie tonight in the deep waters of the lake. May God have pity on their souls, said Grandfather, crossing himself. If it were only true, sighed Hedwig, if it were only true. As she said this, she put her arms about Walter and Rudy, and they sat together on a bench by the fire. Walter stared into the embers. It seemed he could see in them a rocking boat full of men. Then his father jumped from it to the shore and kicked the boat back into the water. Where his father was now, he wondered. Where was his father now, he wondered, looking up from the fire. Was he hiding in the cold, wet forest? Was he sitting in some friendly woodcutter's hut, warm and secure? If he only knew. Tell is like a cat, said one of the neighbors. He will find his way home, said another quietly to Hedwig, patting her on the shoulder, for Tell's wife was weeping again. In a moment, Walter heard her whisper something to Grandfather, for he raised his hand and said, Hush all. Friends, we know you have come to comfort us, but Hedwig is weary and would be alone. I ask of you to leave us in peace. We will send Walter and Rudy to the village if we learn anything new. Walter nodded. The people understood, for they walked out quietly, and at last the hut was empty of all but the Tell family. Mark my word, daughter, said Grandfather, sighing and sitting wearily on a bench. Every woman's son will be coming here now with a new rumor until at last we learn the true story. Each man adds a little to what he has heard, and the story grows like a snowball. We can but wait and pray. Let us eat now. The boys are hungry, said Hedwig, as she brought a big bowl of whey left after making goat's cheese. They all pulled up to the table, and as they were eating, Prinz barked. Someone knocked timidly at the door. Come in, friend, said Grandfather wearily, thinking it was just another curious neighbor. The door opened slowly. There stood Klaus, the hermit, the man of God, in his dark, long robe. Klaus had heard of Tell's escape from a passerby and had come to comfort the herdsman's family. I learned of your sorrow, Hedwig, he said quietly, and would pray with you for your husband's return. He is indeed a brave man, and you have a brave son, too. he added, putting his hand on Walter's head. Together they all knelt on the floor as Brother Klaus prayed. May the good Lord who watches over the weak, the pure, the innocent, now watch over brave William Tell. Bring him home safely and keep him from all harm. Amen. Afterwards, Brother Klaus shuffled from the hut quietly and disappeared into the darkness. When Walter closed the door, and after the holy man, his heart too was comforted. Soon they all went to bed. Hedwig let Prinz sleep inside by the fire this one night. She was the last one of her family to close her sad eyes. The fire flickered on the hearth, and the wind whistled among the pine trees. A goat bleated sadly now and then. Water dripped down the chimney as regularly as the ticking of a clock. The church bells tolled and told the passing of the hours, while the family of William Tell slept restlessly. Just as dawn was breaking, Walter Tell awakened, for Prinz, jumping against the door and whining, Walter heard footsteps. A grayish light came through the single window, and then all at once the door burst open, and in the dim light of the new day, Walter saw his father. He stood in the doorway trembling, his tunic torn and streaks of dried blood running down his arms like dark rivers. He was drooping with weariness and covered with mud and dirt. "My husband! Oh, my husband!" cried Hedwig, jumping from her bed. She ran and clasped Tell around the neck and sobbed on him. "You have come at last! At last! How anxious we have been! Oh, my husband!" Grandfather had awakened too and was staring sleepily at Tell. "I am spent," sighed Tell at last. "Let me sit. I have walked through the night and have not slept, so it seems, for years." Yes, yes, take off those muddy clothes, my husband. I will bring you dry ones," uttered Hedwig, tears of joy in her eyes, as Walter and Rudy, now fully awake, danced around their father. "Father, father, how did you get away?" they cried. "Did the boat really sink, father? Tell us, how did you get away?" Children, be quiet," said Hedwig sharply to them. "Don't you see your father is sick and must eat and rest and be quiet? Later, he will tell you." The boys stared at their father with anxious eyes. He looked wounded. His face was drawn and haggard, like that of an old man. William Tell put on dry clothing, washed the blood from his arms and the mud from his face and neck. Then he sat down and ate and drank until he could eat and drink no more. And after his meal, he seemed to grow younger with the minutes. Soon he lifted Rudy on his lap, while Walter stood beside him, with his hand upon his father's shoulder. All were waiting. We will have to find out next week what had happened to William Tell and on his journey home, and that will be Chapter 4, Courage. Until next time, we will read and discover all that William Tell went through.